Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. An interesting pattern that I've been tracking for a while is this overlap between the creative and the spiritual. Countless clients, students, mentees, and even colleagues who come into my space are on a healing path because ultimately they want to create something out there in the world. Some part of them craves to contact this inner creator, this inner artist, to be able to facilitate the process of bringing out that unique creation into the real world. So in this episode, I invited energy and inner child healing practitioner Natasha Levinger for a conversation that explores the intersection between creativity and spirituality. Natasha is a dear friend and a brilliant, skilled practitioner. Her book, Healing Your Inner Child, Reparenting Yourself for a More Secure and Loving Life, is a resource that I'm always recommending to other people that I work with. Natasha is also a writer, and she spent years in the world of improv, so she has really interesting takes on this intersection between creative and spiritual work. We explored the fear of listening to our creative inner child and making space for them in our lives. We explored breaking down rigid definitions of what creativity means, as well as the difference between openness and codependency. Finally, we also discussed Natasha's take on creative manifestation, which is so juicy. So be sure to stay tuned to the end of the conversation to hear that discussion. I am so excited to share this episode with you, and yeah, let's get right to it. Welcome to the podcast, Natasha.
Oh my
Welcome
gosh.
back.
Yay.
Thank you. I love having you on. So I was so excited that you said yes to this. And
Please.
I wanted to give people kind of the origin story of this conversation, which was, I think this always kind of happens between the two of us. Like we were just exchanging voice memos back and forth. And then, we started talking about creativity, and then you sent me that podcast. I think it's the unpublished podcast by Amy McNee and James Weinstock, right? And we started talking about this intersection between creativity, or maybe more specifically, our respective creative practices and our spiritual practices. I personally am in the process of kind of really recovering, and in my mind, what I'm really doing right now is like healing my creative inner child. This piece that's like the creative child was so painful that for a while I didn't even know where to start, and it was so below my unconscious that I didn't see it. So I'm kind of in that process now. So I wanted to talk to you because I feel like there's all these connections, and maybe before we jump in, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I just wanted to say about that. What's so wild about that is that actually my last newsletter, I talked about connecting to that part for the first time in a really clear way, like her talking to me, like almost like initiating contact with me, because I was unloading the dishwasher and I just like heard myself. Well, I heard her say to me, I'm a silly person who likes to have fun.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, this is kind of weird. But then
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wait a minute. Like, I was like, let me slow down for a second and really
Yeah.
hear. Because normally I would have been like, well, first of all, normally I wouldn't have heard that. But I did have an impulse to rush past that.
Mm-hmm.
But then I kind of slowed down. I was like, oh my God, that's true.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
and it's true from just this joyful inner child. Like, kind of like you were saying, I've done all this healing work with all
Yeah.
these other parts. And I feel like now I have enough space that that could bubble up
Mm.
and I wouldn't ignore it either.
Mm.
And first I told my kid, I was like, I have to tell you guys, I have teenagers and they were just sitting in the living room next to me. I was like, I have to tell you something that just happened. I told them that I heard, I'm a silly person. I like to have fun. I couldn't even get it out. I was laughing so hard. And then they started laughing so hard. And then my daughter was like, have you told dad yet? And I was like, no, he's on a call. And she goes, this is important enough. You should interrupt.
I love that. I love that
And
so
then when I
much.
did tell my husband, he was like, I've never heard a truer statement. And I was like, oh my God, that is a true statement. And
Yeah.
this part of me has been like, I really haven't been letting her out, even though
Mm-mm.
I don't know how you experience me. I'm not a serious person,
Mm.
but I also am very spiritual. Anyway, I feel like this all connects to what we're saying because
Yeah.
I am a Pisces rising. I live in my spirit world, but
Yeah.
that's not a
Aquarius
serious world for
sun.
me. What's that? Aquarius
Aquarius
sun.
sun. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Libra
Mm-hmm.
moon. Um, but yeah, anyway, I just had to share that because it was
Yeah.
like such contact. It felt like
Mm.
almost like contact from it didn't feel like contact from something other than me.
Mm.
It didn't feel like a guide or something.
Yeah.
It felt like me, but just like, wow, I haven't been nurturing her.
Right. Right. I have a whole theory about this, Natasha,
Oh,
because I feel like we've created a society where we actually really belittle and degrade children. And we create
wow.
this division between adults and children. And it's almost like my experience was that I have all these different inner child parts, right?
Yeah.
And all of my scared inner children parts are scared of my joyful inner child part because that's the part that always
Mm.
gets into trouble. And that's the part that always triggers the adults because the adults feel like they have to be an adult, quotes, right? And so it's almost like I see this as like a huge beyond generational trauma because it's like
Mm.
we were raised by parents who were afraid to let their joyful inner children
Yeah.
come out and play, right? And so
Yeah.
when they see that in us, they want to squash it.
Yeah. That's so interesting because a lot of people have feelings around inner child work to begin with.
Mm,
And I wonder if that's partly why, because I
yeah,
know part of it is like
yeah.
fear, like understandable fear, like they don't want to feel into their pain.
Hmm.
But I wonder if also part of it is this minimizing of the child experience overall.
Right, right.
But also, as you were saying that, I wonder if it's more acute in maybe I was just thinking how you're a Virgo rising,
Hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And actually,
Yes.
me being a Libra moon, which isn't there a lot of like child stuff around that? Or maybe I'm thinking of the wrong thing.
I
I
feel
don't
like
know.
the moon has a lot to do with our early experiences in childhood, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also was just thinking, I've always felt very in touch with
Mm,
being a child,
yeah.
always.
Yeah. I love that.
But
Yeah.
but there wasn't this like embracing of it. It was just kind of like I think maybe there's even some shame around that. Like, oh, I should feel more like an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I'm around serious adults,
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
feel like, ooh, I'm
Yeah.
masquerading. I feel like New York City is the only place where I've really seen people letting themselves.
Mm.
could like, you know how like you'll walk down the street and like someone's like dancing
Yeah.
or like stuff like that and nobody gives them a second look.
Yes. Yes.
I
You
do love
can
that.
you can be the wildest person on the subway and other people are just reading their books.
That's right.
They're like, go away.
Exactly. They're like, I'll get through this person
Yes.
going through this thing they're going through. But I do love it. I love people who feel free to express that.
Yeah. Would you want to tell us a little bit about your relationship with creativity, Natasha? Because I know
Yeah.
you and I spoke about, your background in comedy as a writer.
I also have I'm healing I think it's a fake dichotomy between spiritual life and creativity.
Yes.
But I feel that, and I think in comedy especially, there's a lot of I don't know, just no offense, but there is a lot of like holier than thou, like, oh, that's stupid. Like anything that's too precious
Mm.
is like, fodder for comedy, which I
Yeah.
get. I mean, I get it, but I do think it kept me from feeling comfortable. It felt like I was coming out of the broom closet.
Mhm.
But so my history, actually, I mean, I wrote from the time I can remember, like stories. I was
Mhm.
alone a lot, and
Mhm.
and I loved writing. And actually, when I was 9, one of the first things in one of my journals I wrote was, I'm either going to be a psychiatrist or an actress,
Whoa.
which I kind of, in some ways, both were fulfilled.
Yeah.
So I pursued acting for a long time, and
Mm.
then I got back into my writing roots because
Mhm.
I started writing things for myself to perform in because it's really hard to wait around to get a job as an actor.
Yeah.
And then yeah, so anyway, I wrote some episodes for My Little Pony.
Wow.
I would punch up scripts, like that means like um attempt to make them funnier.
Mhm.
um
You
Stuff like
spike
that.
them with some sparkles,
That's
glitters.
right.
Yeah.
I wrote a movie for Oxygen. So
Mm.
anyway, I was writing and I was performing. It's where I met my husband at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in New
Mhm.
York.
Mhm.
And yeah, I was very immersed in that world. And I just became dissatisfied, I guess.
Mm.
I just became kind of bored with the process. Well, like
Mm.
it's a lot, and also I'm so hesitant to say this, Jonathan, but like when you're around a lot of comedians, you're all doing bits. Like there
Yeah.
isn't a lot of like there's not a lot of like deeper conversation a lot of the time. I mean, I did make
Mm.
friends where we would have deeper conversations, obviously, but a
Mhm.
lot of it is bit, which can be really fun. But I
Mhm.
just kind of grew tired of that world. And then
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
the constant striving for work was so hard.
Mhm.
Um, so that's why oh, and the whole time I was doing that, I was training in what I do now, in
Yeah.
the energy healing I do now.
Right.
So, but I wasn't doing it for people. My intention really was to do it to heal myself or to work
Mm.
on healing myself.
Yeah.
And so for many, many, many years, that's how I just was doing it for myself. That's my background.
How did you make the pivot from doing comedy to doing healing work?
Well, so it was hard. It was
Mm.
really well. The first hard thing was we left LA because we moved from
Mhm.
New York to LA. And so
Mhm.
when I left LA, I pretty much knew that was my decision to stop trying to find work.
Mm.
So I knew I was like kind of at this crossroads of I'm not really doing that kind of writing anymore.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, when I have done this for people, they seem to really get a lot out of it. They really respond. So maybe I'll try to make this my job.
Mm.
So that's what I did. I sent an email basically to all my friends.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'm starting this.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it just kind of yeah, it went from there because it's my passion. It's really what I do 24/7. I'm always reading spiritual books, listening to podcasts. I also listen to comedy podcasts too, and watch comedy shows. So I do both. They're both
Mhm.
my passion, but really learning about yourself and like other people and how people work, the more I do it, the more I'm very excited by it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so that just yeah, went from there.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I see so many aspects of creativity in your work. For
Mm.
one, you're one of the most colorful and
Oh,
alive writers on Substack.
oh,
I
thank
love
you.
your writing, and I feel like I can actually hear it in your voice.
Oh, thank you. I love
And
writing, so I
yeah,
appreciate it. I'm one
yeah.
of the rare people who actually love writing.
Hmm. Hmm. We need to talk about this off, off air because I'm like, oh yeah, I can learn a little bit from that. Um, but yeah, do you feel like in doing energy healing work, doing inner child work, what aspects of that feel creative to you? Or do you feel like there's a connection there?
Yeah, I do think that I have some kind of block about it. Like being creative means basically entertainment stuff, like
Mm,
or like music or art,
mhm.
visual arts or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
And I do think that there's a big part of me that thinks I'm not being creative, but even as I say that, I could feel another part of me be like, "Oh no, that's not true. Don't say that." So
Yeah.
yeah, I think I am really. I mean, I'm constantly creating like stuff for like TikTok. I like making videos and writing my Substack and stuff, but yeah, it feels like it's not deemed creative, I guess. I don't
Mm,
know, but like I haven't recognized it in myself until we just started saying this as
yeah.
being creative.
Yeah. Yeah. It is creative. I mean, I also think about how if you look at various legends and folk tales and mythologies and just kind of stories from the past, the sage is always kind of crazy. Like the difference
Oh,
between
interesting.
the hermit and the fool is actually not very big. And for
Mm,
example, I've been watching Rings of Power, which is the prequel to Lord of the Rings.
mm,
And and one of the characters that was portrayed there was Tom Bombadil, and he's kind of this really ridiculous character.
mm,
And that's also the case with Merlin, for example, like one of the greatest sorcerers in,
mm.
human consciousness. Like Merlin's a shapeshifter. Merlin's crazy.
Wow.
Merlin's,
Wow.
yes, Merlin is wise, but Merlin also has this really wild personality, like kind of
That's
this,
fascinating.
yeah, and in some ways, I
Mm,
think a lot of people who are in the healing work or in the magical work, we deal with a lot of invalidation from the general
definitely.
scientific materialist worldview
Yes.
culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for a lot of people, the only way to handle that was to try to be a serious person.
Oh, interesting. Before I forget, also Carl Jung, he had like multiple breakdowns,
Mm. Mhm.
like nervous breakdowns.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's also where he found a lot of his realizations or his theories.
See, I'm not surprised because I feel like the people who do that work the best are the people who are like walking the path themselves. I love Rick Rubin, but I also feel like Rick Rubin himself is not a musician, so like he
Mm.
holds space for music to happen,
Is
right?
that true though? Can
Yeah.
we say that? But I mean, isn't he a producer?
Yeah, but he doesn't have any technical skills. He just sits there.
He just sits there and
Yeah. He talks to
yeah, I
people
don't know. I
and
feel like you may not like what I'm about to say, but
go for it, Natasha.
I feel like how a lot of writing is done in the thinking and like you
Mm,
don't, it's not actually physically.
mhm,
And I feel like he's a musician in that way. Like he's
mm,
processing the music. I feel like there's no way we can't call him a musician. Like he
mm,
is internalizing that music and he is processing it and and then he's saying, giving his input and like helping design it. It's just not with the instrument.
Mm. Hmm.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
hashtag hot take.
I no, I can see that. I can see that. I feel like for me, what I think of when I think about him is he has this kind of detached perspective because he's helping other people make their music. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
not putting his own like
Stamp on it.
there's a huge difference between like someone who is like Adele, who is writing the song and has to
Yeah.
perform that song versus someone who just sits there and helps make the song better.
But it's funny, you are such a little music snob there, Jonathan,
I
because
am.
because I'm a musician too, so I feel confident like contributing to this, like because I write music but like he's not quote unquote just sitting there. I mean, like you could
Mhm.
pull some schmo off the street
Right.
and have them just sit there and they would not
Mhm.
contribute the way Rick Rubin contributes. You know,
True, true.
there's something happening.
Yes, for
And yeah,
sure. For sure.
it's a different talent for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a different kind of contribution too, maybe. It's a
And
different
also,
role. Hmm.
yes, yes. Sorry to interrupt you. I just like also I remember way back when he was like, I think he produced Run DMC maybe or
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, I remember and then like he produced something else right after that and I was like, whoa, I loved both of them. They were very different kinds of music and I could
Mm-hmm.
tell it was him.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's kind of like is would you say it's kind of like a director? Like a director isn't writing and they aren't acting,
Yeah, yeah.
but
He's a producer. He's a
yeah,
producer.
yeah, he's
That's
a
that's
producer.
what we call it in music. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's a
I
producer, but I feel like that's still a musician.
mm,
Anyway, we don't have
mhm.
to. It's still extremely creative.
I that's a really good point, Natasha, because as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about being a coach, being a spiritual practitioner,
Mm-hmm.
and how I'm being a mentor, and how in playing those roles, like when I do it with my clients, for example, I am not living their lives. I'm not the one having the hard conversation with the
Right.
with the with their partner, right?
Right.
They're the one having the hard conversation with their children and their partner. Like they're
Yeah.
in their lives.
Yes.
And yet, yeah, I think there's something very creative about guiding as well. And
There
you and I,
is.
yeah, you and I have talked about this maybe in our last recorded conversation on the podcast, actually, about how there are skills necessary in holding space. But
Yeah.
yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I do think that I'm really good at noticing patterns in
Mm,
people. Like when something's going on with them, first I can see it in their energy, but then I can
mm,
also see how it relates to other things in their lives and like the nuances of it. So that
mm,
is like a creative practice. Like I have to, it does feel actually similar to writing
mm,
when I don't know what's going to be on the page and
mhm.
I'm just going in and going with what's coming out. It
Yep.
is a similar feeling. It's a
Mhm.
creative process of noticing these things and feeling into them and seeing how they fit and then
Mm.
yeah, seeing how it
Yeah.
lands with the other person and then they give that feedback. It is very much an alive process.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe some practitioners where people aren't resonating it could either be they don't resonate with that creative flow with the other person or
Mm.
it could be that that person is kind of not alive in the moment
Yeah.
because you really do have to be present in the moment with a person when they come to you
Right.
and
Right.
if you're not then you're missing a lot which I think is
Mhm.
yeah a creative process.
Yeah. 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 There's also something here I'm tracking around neutrality, around
Mm,
um,
yeah.
finding our own space and claiming our own internal space so that when people come to us and ask us to mediate their process, because I think when people come to me for astrology readings or when people come to you to get an energy healing session, I think what's happening is they're actually mediating between different parts of themselves, or different
Definitely.
parts of their lives. And finding that space of neutrality to me also feels like a really important part of creativity, actually.
Yeah, actually, it comes back to when you were saying about writing. I
Hmm.
think a lot of people understandably struggle with their critic when they're writing.
Yeah.
So it's just like that critic is constantly like tap, tap on the shoulder.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, I think that's why what I like about writing is I'm able most of the time to tell that critic, like, I'll talk to you in a little bit if it comes
Mm.
up, if she comes
Hmm.
up,
Hmm.
and just like flow from that neutral place. Because when we're
Oh.
merged with our critic, we're not neutral anymore.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And I think like great artists, it's funny because neutral, I feel like can sound detached, like, oh,
Mm.
I'm just neutral. I
Yeah.
don't care about, but
Yeah.
it's not a detached place. It's a connection with your higher self, I think. It's a connection with the
Mm.
channel. When you're neutral, then
Mhm.
you can connect with your own, with all of the parts equally. The exciting thing about neutrality is then you have connection to the flow of your, really, it can be like your God self. I mean, that's
Yeah.
like the
Hmm.
most beautiful, the most beautiful connection. But
Hmm.
you do have to be neutral, meaning you can't be merged with all these other parts in order to experience that. I think
Right.
some of like the greatest creators, musicians, all of that, actors, like even if their lives are, they're merged all day long,
Mm.
they're able, once they're on stage or once they're performing whatever, they're able to just like connect to that flow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they get off stage or whatever it is and they're back to themselves, so
Yeah.
to speak.
I've been thinking a lot about how, like, what is the role of the body in all of this, and
Mm,
how there is something to what you're saying too about the meeting place between the body, the heart or the emotional realm, and the spirit, right? And also the mind. And
mm,
to me, the flow state is actually the moment when all of that is able to communicate freely with one another. Like
yeah.
we're not trying to edit ourselves as we are letting it out, and
Yes.
um, yeah, I experience this a lot when it comes to the contrast between recording conversations like this, right, versus when I'm recording solo episodes. Because sometimes with solo episodes, like I can feel when I'm not in flow. And it's much
Mm.
harder for me to get to that point of being in flow because I think I try to effort it. But in
Oh.
talking to you, Natasha, I think there's something about like how we kind of can't stop it. There is this
Yeah.
flow and we're just
Yeah.
talking and we kind of can't like pause it, right? And it always when there's another person in front of me, I think it always makes me more free to kind of let it flow,
Mm.
and what's
Yeah. I
coming up
wonder
for
if
you?
that's a generator thing, like having
Ah.
something to respond to, you know?
I think so. I think so.
But we're both open throats, right? Are you
Yeah.
open
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's also interesting to me.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
isn't it normally like
Yeah.
you would need a closed one?
I think that what I've seen is open throat people are so much more aware of how they are being received. Like what they're saying is being received by
Oh,
the other person. And I think what can
ugh.
be difficult for the open throat is there's almost like the psychic awareness of the all the different ways that what we're saying can be received, right? Like
Oh
some of
my
my most
God. Yes.
does that ring
Oh
true for
my
you,
God.
Natasha? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And
It's,
I
yeah.
think it's interesting because you and I have also spoken about like how sometimes it can be challenging to facilitate kind of a group situation compared to
Mm-hmm.
one-on-one, right? Because
Yes.
one-on-one, you can really clearly and easily respond moment by moment, and you can also have ample of time and opportunity to really talk about what's happening, you
Yes.
know? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
can't manage. Maybe this is a really good, actually, lesson or something to think about is like
Mm.
some is because first of all, it's not healthy to manage how you're coming off
Yeah.
anyway or coming
Yeah.
across.
Yeah.
Like we're not like that's codependency.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Like, oh wait, let me make sure you're okay with what I'm saying, or like, let
Mm,
me make sure what I'm saying is landing in the way I mean
mm-hmm.
it, like kind of trying to control the reaction.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there's something healing, like finding a different thing to react off of or to feel off of. Do you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Totally.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like coming off of, like, it could just be our own values. Like, oh, okay, did that sound right to me?
Mm-hmm.
I only need to figure that out. Yeah.
Right. That's an advice that I think comes from the majority of the population and works for the majority of the population because 70% or so of people have defined throat. So
Mm.
all they have to do is actually listen to themselves and listen to that inner
Oh.
voice while they're
Mm-hmm.
speaking. For me, my experience, and I can only really speak from the I
Yeah.
here, has been that I need to connect to something else beforehand, actually. What always makes me
Uh,
feel much more secure is one, I never actually have to do anything by myself ever. Like I can actually make it a
mm.
conversation. Like I can set up the time to really imagine an audience for which I am sharing something. So it's
Mm.
almost like if I am recording a podcast episode on the eclipse, I really like sit down and take some time to imagine my audience being right there with me. And then I
Ah.
also feel into the transmission that's wanting to come through me,
Mm-hmm.
from the planets, because I
Yeah.
talk to the planets.
Yeah.
And then I let the quality of the transmission dictate what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, and also the pace at
Mm.
which I'm saying it. Because what I'm
Mm.
realizing, Natasha, is for me at least, the open throat doesn't have its own rhythm. Like it's almost like it's
Ah.
able to kind of shapeshift very quickly, like moment by moment. It's not like this very defined voice, which
Right.
is incredible actually, because depending on who you're speaking to, depending on the topic you're talking about, you can modulate your delivery and it can become art.
Mm.
I think all of our open centers are the places of the greatest wisdom, actually, because we're able to sample different ways of being.
Mm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, I guess I feel it's confusing to me because I do
Mm.
think that, like, what about the codependency of it all? You know what I mean? Like, I don't want
Yeah.
to be having to modulate. I don't want to have to emotionally caretake as a recovering
Hmm.
codependent, you
I
know?
think I think I think that codependency exists within a spectrum, Natasha.
I think that what this is just bringing up for me personally, as I try to read the room of the audience that I can't see,
Yeah.
um, is just like I think I need this only comes up for me in groups.
Hmm.
It's really not like you said, actually, what we've said to each other is like one
Uh-huh.
on one, it's not a problem. In groups, I get overwhelmed with like,
Mm.
what? That's where I think I do have to anchor into first my knowing and knowing that, yeah, that I believe whatever it is I'm going to say or that I, like it or whatever. And then I can see if do some of that reading stuff. Because I think if I'm just focused on that, that's like too triggering. That's like my
Mm.
inner child wanting to please everybody. And
Mhm.
that I really do need to know first that because yeah,
Mm.
it is hard. We are interdependent people, but like when the first people in your lives were the ones that hurt you, it's
Yeah.
like trusting in that interdependency
Mm.
can
Mhm.
be hard.
Yeah.
And now that we're talking about all this, I feel like like this is going to sound like I'm high, but like everything is creative. Like
Yeah.
living life is creative. Like you're
Absolutely.
sitting here like trying to figure out how to like, okay, what do I want to do next? What do
Mm.
I like? How do I want to relate to this person? Like all of that is creativity.
Yeah.
I want to get back to like what you said in the very beginning about struggling with spirituality and creativity.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about is working through disappointment. What I've seen is a lot of people became spiritually curious after a serious episode of huge disappointment.
Mm.
Like not many people turn to
Interesting.
spirituality just because they're like, oh, tarot cards sound fun.
That's
Like
so
usually
funny. Oh
they
my
go into
God.
astrology or they go into energy work because they're like moving through separation with their partner. I think there's only a very small subset of people who like are kind of born already on that spiritual path, and like that is a very specific path. If I think back to my own journey, I really started taking my spiritual exploration seriously because I was very disappointed by an artistic pursuit. And
Mm.
it's almost like
Mm.
that disappointment spurred me to go on a healing journey. And
Mm.
um, I don't know, I guess I'm curious to hear if you see that correlation or
Hmm. Again, my childhood was rough. So
yeah.
I started my practice. I always actually had a very strong connection to God,
Mm,
but I started my own practice intentionally when I was 15 after we could call it a disappointment, realizing stuff about my mom. Like I wasn't going to be able to fix that.
yeah.
So that led me on that path.
Mm,
But disappointment, I feel like it could go one of two ways. It could be either some people, when they're disappointed, shut everything down. It's too scary for them to look at,
yeah.
or it feels too hopeless. That's something that's been coming up a lot lately is hopelessness
Right.
and how strong that part is. When you feel hopeless, it really shuts down
Mm,
all of your connection to spirit because
mhm,
it's just like, what's the point? It's almost like feeling abandoned by spirit.
mhm. Yeah. And I'm now thinking about something you said earlier about codependency and about modulating what you're saying to the room. And I'm thinking about how the difference is, are you acting out of a sense of powerlessness or a sense of
Mm,
agency? Because I think
yes.
ultimately we're the only people who can answer that question. And similarly, I think creativity and spirituality both have this thread around trying to make sense of something that's ineffable,
Mm,
trying to make sense of something that's inherently
unknowable.
unknowable.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think creativity and spirituality comes when we allow ourselves um, to be open to being surprised. I've been thinking a lot this summer about Charlie XCX, as is everybody
Hmm.
else, right? Because she's having her moment.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about how, imagine if a healer act like that. Like
Mm,
we would kind of look side-eyed them. Like, can you imagine if somebody has an astrology podcast and kind of talks or acts like Charlie XCX?
yeah.
Like, I think we would kind of side-eye her. And I
Yeah.
think this is where I start to get very
Yeah.
suspicious. There's a lot of ideas that people have about this is what spirituality looks like. This is what being a spiritual person looks like, and this is what
Yes.
what it's not like, right? Like, oh,
Yes.
you're not spiritual enough if you don't XYZ,
Yes.
which
Yes.
I think is actually
100%.
really toxic,
Oh,
straight
it's
up.
so toxic because we are all spiritual people.
Right.
And also there is yeah. As I said before, I'm passionate about learning about people and spirituality. And I also binge watched Vanderpump Rules for 5 months.
Yes.
So yeah, and it's true that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about stuff like that. Like,
Right.
yeah, I can, and also even adding humor. I think it comes back to also humor
Mm,
is only a little, I only see it a little bit in the spiritual space. So it felt
yeah.
very awkward
Yeah.
coming in. It was like, well, who am I? I'm either the spiritual Natasha or I'm the comedy version of myself,
Right.
but not both.
Right.
And yeah. So it does feel like, I feel like even taking spirituality out of it, I think people think that there's somewhere to get to, first of all, to
Mm.
be enlightened. There's some kind of like version of yourself where you will get to someday and it will be quote unquote perfect.
Hmm.
And so then, therefore, spiritual practitioners should be already quote unquote perfect.
Yeah.
And they can't, yeah. But, some of our most celebrated people, I feel like, are pretty honest about not being that way. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess maybe they're not, I don't know if we call them spiritual practitioners, but like Elizabeth Gilbert
Mm.
and Glennon Doyle and,
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's come to mind.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I think it really does come down to this idea of somewhere to get to, which is, of course,
Mm.
this capitalistic approach to
Hmm.
spirituality.
Yeah.
And that we have to be this perfect way. So much is solved in terms of feeling better about things through
Mm.
validation. We're
Yeah.
just so multi-layered, and there's always another level you can go to in terms of knowing yourself. Talk
Yeah.
about unknowable. We'll never know ourselves
Yeah.
completely.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot of different factors that lead up to this, but the reality that um we live within like the Instagram version of spirituality, for example,
Yes.
where we have to be digestible within the 30 seconds that we have people's
Yes.
attention, right?
Yeah.
I'm calling it Trader Joe's spirituality.
Oh my
Not
God.
because I love Trader Joe's, but it's like you get a little snack. Like you only go to your practitioners because they have all this good stuff and you're just like picking up all the good stuff. But I think
Hmm.
people don't like to see what leads up to the good stuff. Like the
Hmm.
apple that you're eating that tastes so good came from something, and I think mostly a
Hmm.
lot of that something is, in my experience, a really healthy blend of like suffering and
Hmm.
also a lot of joy because the only way to get through sufferings is joy.
Well, this comes back to this joyful inner child and like the
Right.
creativity of that part. Like
Yep.
how do we get to it? And something that I am finding more and more as I'm like, yeah, it's just that by working through the suffering,
Mm.
actually, it's funny. The joy
Mm.
comes out naturally as these
Mhm.
other parts feel safe.
Yeah. Yes.
The other thing about Instagram that we see, of course, is like Instagram versus reality. It's again,
Mm.
we're all like everybody's trying to show just their perfect side. But if
Mm.
when we have these brave souls who show the not perfect side, again, validation heals. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, they're doing that. Okay.
Mm.
And that feels actually resonant. It's like that feels like the truth. Like
Hmm.
I don't have to strive to do that. Maybe that'll
Yeah.
come up naturally when I accept my other parts, but like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
not about getting to this end goal.
Mm.
If I'm going to say one thing about most of the people that come to me, I think are just wanting like more connection or relief from feeling some type of way or like more understanding or clarity.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think there is this underlying current that some people feel like there is somewhere to get. Like, okay, tell me the quick news so that
Mm.
I can get, so that I can fix this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, I actually do believe that doing little things, I know there's a thing now against consistency, like because a lot of people with ADHD, I have ADHD. I know it's hard to be consistent, but like I hate to say it, but I really believe that that's a big deal.
I
Like
think
just
so.
doing it 80% of the time,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
consistently little. And it can be like for 2 minutes, even just
Yes.
like
Yes.
so little. That's like, yeah, one of my, if I could scream something from a mountaintop, it would be like, you don't have to like spend an hour meditating every day or
Yes.
like be a very serious person. You
Hmm.
just need to like connect to yourself
Yeah.
in little spurts throughout the
Yeah.
day, even just like while you're driving anyway. So say hello to
Hmm.
yourself.
Right. Right. I think people also really confuse or entangle um consistency with rigidity, which are totally not the
Yes.
same.
That is a great
Totally not the
point.
same. Because
Yes.
and the thing is, being consistent and rigid will always lead you to break yourself, basically. You will
Yes.
never be able to stick to something if
Mm-hmm.
you are both consistent and rigid because it will feel
Yeah.
really bad and you
Yeah.
just don't want to do it.
Yeah. You have to talk to yourself. Be like, okay, we good to do, let's just do this for 2 minutes and then we don't have
Right.
to do it after that or we can keep going.
Right.
But yeah, I think this thing about now coming back again, because like to the spirituality, creativity, it's just so crazy that it does feel like there was such a um chasm between the two when actually
Mhm.
they're kind of the same thing.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
They are the same thing, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always really funny to me when we meet teachers who are a little bit older because sometimes they would say something that you've heard a million times and then they say
Mhm.
it and it has a different gravity. But
Yeah.
one of my teachers, Francesca McCartney, at some point she said creativity and spirituality are exactly the same thing.
Oh, that's funny.
Like she said that in such a way that's like, oh, okay, no questions. Or like you can't even ask a question anymore. And I've been thinking about that and I feel like that's always been part of my experience, but the process of embodying that knowing has taken a long time for me.
Well, I think it probably is because coming back to it, we are interdependent people and we
Yeah.
are getting this message from our culture, from
Mm,
society that they are very separate. You can be a
yeah.
silly person who likes to have fun, or you can be a spiritual person
Hmm.
because we're multidimensional. And when
Yeah.
we allow for all of these dimensions, of course, we're expansive and we're going
Yeah.
to then let more spirituality in because what is
Mm,
spirituality?
hmm.
It's not something outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
It's us. It's an
Yeah.
expression of us.
Yeah.
So if we're just only letting out the serious side, that's a very one-dimensional connection to our spirit.
Yep. Um,
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more about manifestation, Natasha. I know you've been thinking a
Oh,
lot and talking a lot about
okay.
manifestation or in your own
Surprise
personal
question.
practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think this is actually super related because manifestation to me
Mm.
is the creativity version of spirituality, actually, right? All the
Mm.
questions that manifestation teachings are asking us to grapple with are questions that artists have to ask themselves.
What do you mean? Like what questions?
Like, for example, if I were to create a symphony, Natasha, I have to ask myself, what reality do I want to create with the symphony?
Oh, interesting.
I
Yeah.
always say that music is actually my first energy modality. It actually is totally
Mm.
energy work because
Oh,
you can see
yeah.
it
Yeah. Yeah.
and
And you're
then you're
just
using your
feeling it and
body.
you're trusting it. Like when
Yeah,
I play my fiddle, I
yeah,
close my eyes and I just find the notes.
yeah,
I'm not like thinking about it with my head.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Manifestation is a, well, I think, as we said, everything is an expression of spirituality, is a creative expression, but
Yeah.
manifestation feels like a co creation. I think that's what it is
Mm,
like a co
mhm,
creation. You're co creating with the universe. With
mm,
energy, yeah, when you are manifesting. So manifesting gets a really bad rap, um, because I think it was so, for a long time. Although a lot of people haven't heard of The Secret. Were you one of those people? I feel like I
I've
asked a
never
couple.
read The Secret, but I do know The Secret. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There's a couple people I was surprised by, but The Secret was like I never read it either, but I just it's basically like vibe with an energy, hold that energy and
Mm,
at all costs and never let it go, and then the thing you want will come to you.
mm,
And
mhm,
it does not take into account shadow work or
mm,
systemic
mhm.
violence of all types.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
so there's that. But but the way that I've been doing it is to still do that first step of like feel into what is it that I want to be feeling. If we do the
Yeah.
human design route, it's like there's specific manifestors and non-specific manifestors. So
Mm,
I'm definitely non-specific. So that means like feeling into the energy of it. Other
yeah.
people who are more specific can like write down the details. And I think they get excited about that.
Mm.
For me, I don't get excited about that. That feels
Mhm.
rigid. But I
Yeah.
think for some, but anyway, doing that. And then what I've been finding is the more expansive. So you feel into it. There's one school of thought that if you say it out loud, actually,
Mhm.
this is now throat chakra stuff. You
Mm.
say it out loud for at least 3 minutes. I don't know why it's 3 minutes. Then you start to vibrate with that energy, like you match the energy.
Mm. Mhm.
And that's where the kind of superstitious holding on to it comes in.
Mm.
It's very bad for our anxious inner child parts. You're like, shit, I didn't do it. And now I'm never going to get the thing. So, but what I find is that the more you expand, it just exposes parts, inner child parts that need our loves and that need to, for different reasons, depending on the thing, to know they're safe in this
Mhm.
expansion
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
used to you, actually vibrating at a certain rate. The other
Mm.
problematic thing is this idea of there's somewhere to get to, or um, that there's a timetable that can be
Mhm.
missed. Those are things that
Mm.
I really throw out
Yeah.
because, yeah, we don't need that.
Yeah.
Um, there's just your desires. Like if you're following your desires, that's your soul is showing you, in my opinion,
Mm.
what is possible for you. Like, oh, here, I would like to create this. Yeah, you're right. It's
Yeah.
creativity. It's like, I would
Yeah.
like to see this in the world.
Yeah.
Not that I questioned you before, but yeah. So that's like your soul showing you that, but then you can have inner child parts that are like, what? No, we get stop it at all costs. And
Mhm.
that can show up in so many ways. Like we talked about hopelessness, that can show up that way so many ways.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
what I've been doing is like saying it out loud, really tuning into that, and it's been really fun
Mm.
and revealing. Okay, so that I talked about the like inner child parts that are unhappy with it, but another thing it
Mhm.
can reveal is like, oh my God, I had this desire within me that I didn't even realize, and like you can see the
Right.
impact and feel into that impact, and that can
Mm.
feel really nice.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's what I've been doing.
Mhm.
Also, when you do it with other people, it magnifies it if you're
Mm.
safe with those people because they can
Mhm.
hold the vision with you and then you
Mm.
can hold their vision for them
Yeah.
too. And
Yeah.
that feels so supportive. And
Mm.
also, I think it amplifies the energy.
Yeah. I keep coming back as I'm listening to you to the idea of safety, actually, Natasha.
Yeah.
Because to me, everything you're saying, like this technique from The Secret of saying your desires out loud, what I've experienced, maybe this is going back a little bit to our conversation about the open throat, is when I'm able to really explain something, like I record something or I try to explain it on a podcast, I feel like it's so much more embodied for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and when I think about, when I imagine this technique you're talking about speaking out my desire, my experience has been that if my desire actually is incongruent with me, when I say it out loud, I can tell. Like, it's
Yes.
almost like the
Oh my
moment it comes
gosh.
out of my mouth, I'm like, oh, that's not
Yes.
actually what I want.
Yes. It apparently it works a different part of your brain when you say it
I,
out loud.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that.
And another thing that can happen is, by the way, that speaking out loud part wasn't from The Secret. It was from this book, Excuse Me, Your Life is Waiting.
Oh,
I
cool.
told you. Yeah. But they
Okay.
use the same technique, but then she came up with the 3 minute thing.
Ah, I see.
Um, but anyway, um, the other thing is when you say it to somebody else. So here's this little story. Years and years ago, I was deciding whether or not I couldn't decide if I wanted to break up with this person or not. And I was wanting to manifest my ideal partner.
Mm,
And I did, which
mhm,
was great. But anyway,
mhm,
I was doing the scripting thing with my best friend.
yeah.
And first I was scripting about the person that I was trying to debate if I was going to leave them or not.
Mm,
And I was so in it, I couldn't really recognize it. But she said to me, when you were doing that with him, your whole energy felt heavier
mm,
than when you did it with just a random person, like an ideal person. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, when she said that, I was like, oh, okay. That I could feel it then when she
Mm,
said that.
mm,
But I
mm,
didn't
mm.
recognize it and I wouldn't have if I hadn't spoken it. So
Yeah.
it's true. It
Yeah.
helps like move the energy. It
Yeah.
is like a creative flow.
Yeah. Because it
Yeah.
is, I think when we say things, it gives it shape, right? Even though the shape is maybe
Mm,
not as tangible as writing it on paper or creating a vision board. But when we do say it, there's a sonic form that that desire takes that
yeah.
then helps us respond to it better,
Yeah.
or like have like sense how our body's responding to it. And the other thing that I wanted to say too was, let me see if I can remember this. You mentioned about kind of the vibration being raised in a group of
Hmm.
people. And I
Yeah.
think that also makes me think about safety because when I am scared to make my creative project or take actions against something that I want, it usually is because I have fears of abandonment. I
To
feel like
100.
I
Yes.
feel like, I'm gonna have to leave my friends behind if I achieve this goal. If I get on
Hmm.
Oprah, I can't possibly keep my circle of friends because they're all gonna hate me.
Oh
Or,
my God.
like all of those stories. I think
It's
this
a
is
good thing
very
she
real,
canceled her show.
right?
When no, but I know what you're saying.
I love how like I'm basically speaking like to 30 years ago. Thanks, Natasha. You keep me fresh.
I'm always sending you the latest TikToks.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, no, that is yes, just 1,000%. And
Yeah.
what I have noticed, that's one of the parts with the safety. And so what I have been saying to that part of me, is just like, you are the most important thing to me. Nothing external is more important than you.
Mm.
And I will never leave you. I will never abandon you.
Yeah.
If you're feeling any type of way, you're my priority. I'm never going to abandon you. And that
Yeah.
really helps.
Mm.
Like that
Mm.
my love is always there.
Yeah. Wow. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is important because I think what you're speaking to is I've never met anyone I think who hasn't felt that way. Who hasn't felt like, "Oh
Yeah.
my God, my expansion will threaten my entire world."
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And the truth is, most of the time it really just improves it.
Mm. Mm.
That's the real truth. Is it brings in the magical things that your soul is wanting. That's why you're feeling the need to expand.
Right.
It's if you're expanding from that place, if you're expanding from ego, there's more to look at with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's like another inner child part that, like,
Yeah.
okay, why do you want this kind of thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something I've noticed too, Natasha, is what I think feels so scary for people to really claim their desires to live their most creative, beautiful life is this fear that if I actually move towards that desire, I'm actually going to get what I want. And then all of these things I've created around me that have been rooted in my own defense mechanism is going
Hmm.
to crumble away. And that crumbling feels really scary. It's like, for example, to use that example of being interviewed by Oprah or
Hmm.
being featured by Oprah and then all my friends leaving me. The
Yeah.
fear there is, you know, um, all my friends who don't like to see me succeed, they're going to come out of the woodwork as actually
Mm-hmm.
having really complicated feelings about my success. And
Yeah.
then I'm going to have to leave them because
Yeah.
I can't unsee what I've now seen.
Yeah.
What do you have to say to that? Because I think this is one of
No,
those one of
I have
those
things to
things
say.
where yeah, because I think
Yeah.
people, I mean, I'm just gonna speak from the eye, like one of the fears of being really authentic with our creative energy is that our creative energy will bring up people's insecurities,
Hmm.
other people's Like I see this in myself. I'm scared of people who are extremely prolific. I'm not
Mm.
going to name names here because they're probably going to be my guests in a couple months, but I've gone through periods, Natasha, of being really scared of inviting people into the podcast who I deem extremely intelligent and extremely creative.
Mm.
They
Mhm.
intimidate me because I've been taught
I'm
that it's a
assuming you're talking
competition.
to me right now about
Yes,
me. This is
absolutely.
embarrassing,
Right.
Jonathan, but okay.
I have to admit my secret in front of everyone.
Okay. What I have to say about that is that it is painful. I have had that
Mm.
happen to me
Hmm.
and it's painful, but I
Yeah.
also know that well, I'm thinking of one person and they were not a supportive person in my life. So it's it kind of had to happen,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
actually it is for your good, but I'm not going to lie and be like, it's fine. They didn't deserve you anyway. So just move on. I mean, you could, I guess, but like, yeah, I'm not going to deny that that's not painful. That can
Yeah.
happen.
Right. Right.
But truly, how good were those people to you in your
Yeah.
life? If they, I mean, maybe they just have like they're so great to you in every other way, but they have a success wound. But then if you're continuing to grow in your career and that's what you want, that's important to you, then that person isn't a good fit for your life.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
is sad though, but we lose people all the time.
It's true. You're right.
No,
You're
I
right.
start.
I'm just laughing
That
because I
sounds
think
so sad.
the way you said it is
I know.
very matter of fact, but it's true. We do lose people all the time. And I think,
Yeah.
I mean, I even think about how for me, sometimes what's more scary is feeling like I'm losing the version of me who is in that
Mm.
friendship. Like I have to let go
Mm.
of that version of me because
Well,
it's
I
no
wonder
longer
if you can
congruent.
just,
Hmm.
right, right.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's a part that you could talk to and you don't have to lose them. You can just
Yeah.
talk to them and integrate them.
Mm-hmm.
Because
This
that
is,
part, maybe that part's a people pleaser. For me, in my case,
yeah.
that's what it was. It was a part that was very invested in people pleasing and keeping
Mm.
that person in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so yeah, I actually freed that part of me by
Mm.
that whole experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
It, in a way, it just like encourages you to grow. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
painful, I mean, growth is painful sometimes. But I
Yeah.
do want to affirm in Oren and Sanea books, which you, Sanea Roman, you also have read her books.
Mm-hmm.
They were my first spiritual books. I love them so much.
Mm-hmm.
They said from the beginning, you can ask to grow through joy.
Mm.
Actually, her first book is called Living with Joy.
Mm.
I recommend
Yeah.
that book highly. But yes, that you can choose. You don't have to grow through pain. It
Yeah.
does happen that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times we're forced into that
Mm-hmm.
through
Yeah.
ignoring your things and then we're
Yeah.
surprised by growth. Doesn't
Right.
have to be that way. It can also just happen that way. But yeah, so I
Mm-hmm.
just want to say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And spiritual growth, you know what? I'm leaving this conversation knowing that spiritual growth is so creative. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like you're like you really have to like dig into it, find ways to um heal that fit with you because not one thing is going to fit everybody. Like for me,
Yeah.
it's very much inner child work and energy healing, but who knows? Maybe in 10 years it'll be something else. And
Yeah.
like you have to be creative about finding these patterns within yourself and
Mm-hmm.
allowing for them. And yeah, there's just so much about it that's very creative. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you.
Beautiful. I really, really love that. Yeah. Thank you for having this conversation with me. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I just say one more thing?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am finding lately all of these surprising ways that our creativity comes out
Yeah.
because I started following this person on Instagram that did a creativity challenge, and the way they did
Mm.
it was through what they wear.
Mm.
And so, like, one week it was monochrome,
Yeah.
you know, and I did the monochrome week, and it was so fun and so creative. And obviously, maybe people are like, duh, fashion's creative. which I
Mm.
do know that. But somehow, like dressing yourself can feel like just a, I mean, even though I love it, like it can feel like just kind of like, well, yeah, obviously I have to dress myself. That's not creative.
Yeah.
But there's so many ways
Yeah.
yeah, creativity shows up in our
You
lives.
can be creative, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Natasha. I just can't wait to have you back again at some point.
Thank you. I love talking to you.
Love talking to you too.